Hello everyone and welcome to today's IG Live. I'm so excited. Today we are going to meet with Dr. Ramani Durvasula. Dr. Ramani is promoting and talking and educating us on her new book, which I've read. And we just did a podcast episode on Let's Talk Love. Her newest book is called It's Not You, Identifying and Healing from Narcissistic People. It is a fantastic read. I hope those of you that are with us live or watching this recording, if you are in a relationship with somebody who is a narcissist, you're working with somebody, you've got a family member, I think all of us can identify somebody in our lives who we've either met or in a relationship with who is a narcissist. And this is going to be a conversation I hope that you're going to learn from and hopefully gain some new wisdom on how to heal from these relationships, which ultimately are very abusive. So I'm going to add Dr. Ramani to our conversation. Hi, Dr.
Hi, how are you? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thank you for joining us for these 30 minutes on IG
Thank
Live.
you.
How exciting.
I kind of feel guilty. I promised everyone I wouldn't keep doing lives. Like we did so many that I was like, this she's back. Let me just actually get me plugged in though too. I just realized that this poor phone is losing some juice here. So
I know that you have been so busy promoting your book and it's fantastic. I'm going to hold it up again. It's so good. It's Not You.
You're so kind.
And we have some excellent questions from the Real Love Ready community.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So I thought we would go through those. And for those that are live, obviously, if you've got questions for Dr. Ramani, this is your time. And I'm going to be watching the chat, and you're going to gain some wisdom on how to heal.
Wonderful.
We're all on this journey together. The more we can support each other, the better, right? That's what this is all
100%,
about.
100%. And for people to know they're not alone in these relationships, right, and how upside down these relationships leave you feeling. Yeah.
Absolutely. So the first question is, how do you forgive yourself after a narcissistic relationship, specifically for the self-manipulation you did?
It always breaks my heart when people ask me, how can I forgive myself? Because you did nothing wrong. The wrong was, you were abused. You were mistreated. You were invalidated. And it was the worst form of mistreatment because it happened from someone who claimed to love you. It's one thing if somebody's mistreating us at work, they don't claim to work, or a stranger in the street. Sure, okay, it's not doesn't feel good. But this is a whole new level of awful, right? So to almost like take a step back and make sure you recognize what was done to you is not okay. So we're going to start there. The self-manipulation, and I'm making an assumption here, I'm making a bit of a leap here, that perhaps this person means sort of the justification, right? The excuses one made to stay in the relationship. And I also want to normalize that. That's all part of trauma bonding. It's actually a natural process whereby we try to attach and connect and what we believe is a loving relationship because it was sold to us that way. And so and these relationships go back and forth, they're good, then they're bad, then they're bad, then they're good, then they're good and bad and good. And it's so confusing. And especially if our only template of relationships is this sort of backing and forthing between good and bad. In order to maintain the connection, we have to rationalize and justify. That's a natural process. So in essence, you're forgiving yourself for you doing exactly what a loving human being would do in a relationship. You did nothing wrong is what I really want to say. And yeah. I'm here to tell you what you went through was an incredibly natural, unfortunate process. But we human beings want to attach to the people who we believe we love or who tell us they love us when in fact they actually don't adequately care for us or cherish us. But until you understand this, you don't understand it. And so we may spend years, but this entire process of healing is about ending these cycles of self-blame. Loving someone and showing up the best you can, there's nothing bad about that. That is you bringing this really sacred part of you into a relationship. When that got abused, that's on the hands of the abuser. However, hopefully me telling you that trauma bonding and all this is a natural process can help you release some of that sense that you were complicit in this.
I agree. Absolutely. So, how much of a narcissism is subconscious?
So when we get into personality, we get into a sort of complicated, without making this a blah blah lecture on psychoanalytic, kind of thought and how we sort of hold things within us. Yes, there's this whole thing called the unconscious and the subconscious, depends on what model you're turning to. But the issue here is this a lot of people try to build a justification structure of they don't know what they're doing. It's just how they go through the world. They're not even aware, but they are aware because they show up in a business meeting with the head of the company, when they're meeting a new group of people they want to impress, when they're at a dinner party. They're the most charming, lovely, let me pull your seat out for you kind of person ever. But then when they're in the car with you alone, when there's no more audience, they mistreat you. That's not subconscious.
Right.
That's very, very aware. Now, the part of narcissism that is not processed at a conscious level is that insecurity and shame part, right? So they don't view them like, they don't walk around saying, well, I'm full of insecurity and shame, so I overcompensate with all these defenses and I need to overpower you. They're not doing that. That's what drives them. So I would say sort of their motivation to overpower, to dominate, to control comes from an offset to the insecurity. I'll say that part's subconscious, but the behavior and the awareness of how to show up, they know how to show up well. They're making a choice that they don't need to show up well to you because either they feel like they've locked and loaded your supply so they don't need to keep trying, or they have contempt for you, or whatever it is. But that's a choice because they are able to show up well when they believe it matters.
That's right. So there's a few questions, a lot of questions in the chat. Thank you so much, everyone. And one thread that that people are asking is, how do I get through life without getting closure from a narcissistic ex-husband? Like, let's say you're co-parenting. I cannot break ties, right? So how do you navigate the relationship with somebody, or you've got a family member, and you're not going to end that, you're not willing or can't end that relationship. So how do we navigate that?
Did the person specifically ask, how do I get closure?
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about closure in two different ways, right? There's ending the relationship is not closure. Let's not confuse those two things. Closure is that sense of being seen, being heard, getting some explanation for what the hell just happened, right? Someone being aware, hey, I wasn't cool. I hurt you. I get that. That moment when we get that, the lock kind of clicks. I'm not saying it makes things better, but for a moment, it gives you a tiny sense of you're not insane. You will not get closure in a narcissistic relationship because they will not take responsibility and will not admit how they showed up. Maybe if they go through therapy 20 years down the road, but today, no. So I don't believe that ending the relationship is closure by any stretch. Ending the relationship is ending the relationship. Closure is that sense that they show up and say, like, take some ownership, give you some insight into what happened, reassure you, that they actually saw you, all of those things. And that's not what's happening in these relationships. So no, people don't get closure in these relationships. And that's a lot of the struggle. I'm just translating.
No, I really like that. So you are not, just that realization that you're not going to get closure.
No.
Great. So
you're not going to get closure.
Yes.
And waiting for it means that people remain stuck in the mental psychological cycle of these relationships, right? It doesn't feel good to, like, in many ways, the best example I could give is if you are a family member or victim of a crime, and the person who committed the crime gets to walk off with absolutely no penalty. When you talk to people who go through that, their processing of trauma is far more complicated than when a person it doesn't, let's say someone, the worst possible crime, someone's life was ended, or they experienced terrible injuries, or, something that changes them psychologically or physically, whatever that is, that yes, someone even going to prison or an award in a lawsuit doesn't necessarily lift all the pain, but there's some sense of, like, there was an awareness, there was a recognition from the world that something bad happened and the person who did it was held responsible. When people don't get that, and they often many times don't get that, you will see that the process of healing from those traumas are much, much more complicated.
Right. Because they're not being validated.
It's beyond validated. You don't feel whole inside. You remain in a self-blame cycle. You are trying to make sense of the senseless, really. And it's very hard to get meaning and purpose when there's nothing that feels like justice.
Right. This one says, I cannot break ties. I go back. Why? This goes into, and you talk about this in your book a lot, right? Just how
Yeah.
like it's this cycle, and
Mm-hmm.
it's so confusing, and and all too often we are blaming the person who's in this, who's like, why aren't you leaving? What is going on? Why
Right.
can't you see?
So to the first question, that was one of the earlier questions that was asked, it's the person was asking about self-forgiveness. This is really about trauma bonded relationships, right? Understanding how we attempt to make attachments with people who are inconsistent and sometimes harmful and sometimes not. Everything in a narcissistic relationship is temporary. The good days, the bad days, you just don't know what you're getting. And you might be a good hour and then it blows up. You might be having a lovely breakfast and you say one thing and the whole thing falls apart. That's what I'm saying about the sheer unpredictability. So in order to stay in something like that, we need to make sense of it. We make sense of it by justifying it. They had a bad day. They had a bad experience in this restaurant before. This reminds them of something that happened in childhood. And we keep excusing the behavior, and they keep leveling up the behavior too. So we kind of get stuck in the cycle. However, the problem is, in this trauma bonded relationship, we also start to believe we invest everything in the hope it can get better. There's something I can do. There's something that can change. And then we feel almost physiologically stuck in this place. So when the time comes to wanting to end the relationship, even though your rational mind, we'll call your wise mind, is like, this is not good for you, this right brain, almost trauma response part, emotional response part of our brain says, no, if this relationship ends, the whole world is going to end. It's like cutting off my own part of my own body. And people feel literal panic. When a person feels panic, they don't want to stay in panic. And when the answer to ending the panic is to go back into the relationship, it actually makes all the sense in the world. Like if you felt like your head was on fire and someone's like, pour water on it and that will make it stop, we're going to pour water on our head, right? But that makes sense. To a person, though, who's in a trauma bonded relationship, going back makes sense. So this is why I write about this at length, probably more than I can get into here in It's Not You, is that in the book, it's really the sense of how you have to be so clear on what is happening in this relationship. That's the radical acceptance piece,
Right.
as painful as it is, and be able to navigate that grief. But this is what I always tell people. I understand you're going to go back. And in a way, it's okay if you go back. And what I mean by that is you have to promise me you'll learn one thing each time. Write down the bad stuff that happens so that each time you go, it's not futile. You're actually getting some information. You're like, okay, this is a pattern. Like I always tell people, I'll make a deal with you. You could go back in because I understand that'll feel easier, but you got to promise me you'll track what's happening. And what happens is each time a person goes back in and comes back out, they learn something. And sometimes, listen, the domestic violence literature has always suggested that on average, people go back 7 times. So that's why I tell people, don't shame yourself. You're trying to feel not uncomfortable. So wanting to do that is very, very normal. Learn something from it. And each time you go back in, you might see it a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more and say, oh, hell no. And we're going to get you to hell no. It just sometimes takes a minute, but don't judge yourself when you get pulled back in. I'm so tired of this idea that there's a perfect survivor out there who's going to get it every time. And like, oh, I saw the red flags. No, we don't work like that. We have histories, we have hearts, we have empathy. You cannot keep shaming yourself in these situations, but instead say, I learned a little bit more. And each time I learned a little bit more and I learned a little bit more. Keep your eyes open. Allow radical acceptance to join you when you go back in, because the more you do that, the less this feels like a relief each time you go back in. And when it stops feeling like a relief, you've gotten somewhere.
Oh, I love that. That's a really good tool. How do you trust yourself again and find your light after narcissistic abuse?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So trust disappears when we're in narcissistic relationships. We don't know who to trust anymore because our enabling people around us say, no, it's cool. Like, just give it a chance. So you just don't know to trust your friends. Can you trust your family? Can you trust yourself? You obviously don't trust them anymore.
I was going to say, trusting yourself has been,
right. All of this loss of trust happens. And so the loss of trust in ourselves, to me, is the worst. I mean, not trusting the narcissistic person is actually quite brilliant, but the loss in ourselves, the trust in ourselves, is so difficult and painful, and it takes time. I think that this is why education about narcissism becomes so important, because then you can start to realize like, oh, I was played by something I didn't understand. And once you say, you give yourself grace to say, I didn't know this. Nobody taught me this. This was not like we're told to go for this shiny, charming, charismatic, attractive person, right? That's what we're told to go for, who's able to fake it for the first 6 months of the relationship. We don't know. No, I mean, when I think of all the people out there who are giving different kinds of advice, like, no, 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 play the rules, play hard to get. I'm like, great. You play hard to get, you're playing into a narcissist's hands, basically. So I think that the trusting yourself comes from understanding this. And then once you're like, now that I have this information, I see it more clearly, that's a little bit more trust you have in yourself. The finding your light again, though, is probably the more important part of that question, is your light wasn't allowed to exist in this relationship. Your light would make them feel smaller. Your light was going to threaten them. And at some level, we all know that if we shine in this relationship, they will shut us down. I am sure there's many people on this live will say, yeah, when something good happened to me, I won an award or I got a promotion and I shared it with a narcissistic person.
They weren't there.
Were they not happy for me? It kind of felt like it was a competition and like they were trying to make me feel small again. Because remember, the narcissistic person also lives with their own abandonment nonsense. And they're like thinking, oh, well, now you're getting bigger than me. I better keep you smaller so I can control you so you can't leave, so you can't be out of their control. And so we do turn our lights off to stay in the relationship. The relationship only works if you turn your light off, because if you turn it on, they don't want that. So in essence, it's an indoctrination into doing that. So what you got to remind yourself is you turned your life off to survive. The switch is right there and you're back, just turn it on and recognize and start small. Turn your light back on with people you trust. I hope that all of us have at least one or two friends where we feel seen and empathized and loved and enough compassion where we can shine. Try it there. Start finding your stride there and then slowly open it up. I will say this, in a way, what a narcissistic relationship does to our light is like it almost throws like a shade over it. We will always feel a little leery about putting our light out there for fear of it being shut down, because it's been shut down so many times. That's a normal part of this. Even with a shade over it, the world needs your light. So get it out there and recognize you can't ever shine it around the narcissistic person. And just because you are shining it with others, always make sure discernment means like, whoop, let me turn that switch off because I'm not letting them see my light. It's no longer that they're shutting your light off. Those fools don't get to see your damn light. That's how I see it.
Oh my gosh, I love that. When you were talking about how this community that you are growing and the awareness that you are bringing to this such important topic, is because we have not identified what narcissism truly is. Mm-hmm. And in back in the day, we would say this blanket statement of emotional abuse. And maybe it was just so overt. It's just like, what I would look at as emotional abuse is being like that person calling you like the worst names possible, or like, you're so stupid, you're so dumb. But I think with narcissism, oh yes, but I think that can be, right? But I think for so many of us, it's more like this, it's so, it's covert. It's happening. Like there's lies, there's deceit, but it's like under the radar, right? Like you said, it's like there's this, it's very, these behaviors are like, they're not so overt.
They're subtle. They're subtle. A lot of narcissistic abuse, what happens emotionally in these relationships is very subtle. I always say it's death by 1,000 cuts. It's all the little digs they get in. You never quite feel psychologically safe in the relationship, right? Like you might think it's a functional relationship, but when you really think back on it or even think in it, you're like, I actually do catch myself before I share things, or they'll often, for example, a common narcissistic play is to engage in mockery, making fun of people, right? And especially in a very vulnerable moment, right? They might make a joke at your expense. And if you try to push back on it, people will view you as the overly sensitive one, is like, can't you just take a joke? Like, gosh. And then everyone in the audience, everyone in the room is sort of like uncomfortably sort of like, yeah, she really can't take a joke, can she? And so you now look like the person who's got something wrong with you because you can't take a joke, but they're always making jokes at your expense. Or eye rolling is a big narcissistic thing too. It's like a lot of contempt when you're trying to express something, share something. And the sad thing is, a lot of people in narcissistic relationships with the best of intentions will go out and buy all the relationship books and say, I'm supposed to express gratitude and kindness, so I'm going to do this. And then you get an eye roll. So even what is a warm gesture could be met with contempt. And so you never would know which way to go, but most relationship books are not written from the perspective of a person who's trying to navigate a narcissistic relationship.
Right. So how do you find the courage to leave? And how do you know for sure it's really not you? It's not, you have to read this book.
Well,
It's not you.
Here's what I'm going to say. I don't think it's about the courage to leave. It's how do you find the courage to just keep on keeping on? Because this isn't about leaving or staying, because not everyone can leave. I'm always going to bring that book to the book. I'm going to bring it to that central concept. Not everybody can leave. Some people have to stay because they have minor children. Some people have to stay because they don't have money. Some people have to stay for religious or cultural reasons. Some people have to stay because they don't have any other supports. So I always highlight for people, it's not about leaving, it's about healing. And that's all that matters to me. You leave, you don't leave. Is it a little bit potentially easier in the long term to heal if you leave? Maybe, but even that could be made hard because of the vagaries of family court and all that other stuff. So I'm not so sure that there's any easy in all of this, but it is about giving yourself permission to say, I don't really need to engage with this anymore. It's hard. It's hard to stay in a relationship and not engage with the person, but really the engagement never had any depth anyhow. It was sort of like a one-sided relationship. You were doing all the work. You were bringing all the emotion. They were just taking it all in when it was convenient for them. Maybe they'd respond, maybe they wouldn't, but you were already doing all the heavy lifting. You were holding the entire tent up yourself. So I think that the piece to remember is that how do you heal is you've got to give yourself permission for it. And that means you have to see this relationship for what it is. And that's the most painful part of all. And once you do that and you really say like, okay, this is what this is, you will be hit by a tidal wave of grief and it'll take a while. And then you'll say, I see this for what it is. And through the many exercises in this book, you'll start to really be able to clarify the what it is. Some people will say, I can't leave now. But then they'll say after 5 years, like, now that I see this for what it is, I am going to leave. Or they wait till their kids turn 18. Or they may find work and might get more stability financially, whatever it is. That people will, once you give yourself permission to see it clearly, everything follows from that. That's the radical acceptance. Those are the realistic expectations. That's the seeing it clearly. Radical acceptance doesn't mean it stops hurting. Anytime someone gets a dig in at you, it hurts. Yeah. Radical acceptance means you're not surprised.
Right. So if you are staying, there are people in the chat that are saying, if you are staying in this relationship and you're parenting and you've got children and one of the parents is a narcissist, are there ways that you can protect your children in that situation?
I think that the best you're going to be able to do is, first of all, get your expectations in the right place. This parent is only going to help you when it's convenient for them. When there's a photo up, when other people are going to be seeing it, when they're in a good mood, when there's something that they want to do, you have to recognize this parent is not going to be participating in your child's life and child's lives in an equal way. They might be the Disneyland parent. We're going to go to the theme park, but you're left with homework and baths and bedtimes. That's what this is. And homeworks and baths and bedtimes, although that feels like drudgery, that's the stuff that's going to make your kid, the adult that they can go out in the world. You're going to be the one bringing empathy. The narcissistic co-parent may literally view the child as a toy that they're entertained by at times, can't be bothered with at times. And so what that means is you also sometimes have to pick up the broken pieces of the child who feels like, but we had so much fun today. Now they don't want to talk to me. You're going to have to gently walk your child through that. You can't say, well, that's because your dad's a raging narcissist, but rather that's hard, honey. I always say, always use this phrasing of grown-ups are hard, hon. Like sometimes grown-ups can like be one way and then they can be another way and it doesn't make sense and it can be frustrating. And I hear that. So you don't have to say your dad's a raging narcissist and he's on and he's off. You don't want to make it ad hominem. You don't want to make it specific. You really want to let the child know this isn't them. The key is to never ever get into that cycle where the child say, well, honey, he's just your dad. And so like, he can't do anything wrong. And I know we sometimes are like the parent should be a hero. I think that's overplaying the hand, but we also don't want to say the narcissistic parent is narcissistic. right? You have to find that middle ground where your child feels seen and heard. You're not gaslighting your child. You're not blowing up, like you're making it like, but your dad wants what's best for you, because the dad doesn't actually want what's best for them, or they'd actually step up, get some therapy, and try to be a better person and treat you better. I would say that one of the greatest harms a parent can do to a child is to mistreat their other parent. That to me is a form of abuse of a child too, when you mistreat the other parent. And we don't talk about that enough.
We don't talk about that enough at all. I completely agree. It's like that is abusing the child because you are abusing the other parent.
Yep. Yep. So it's just, you have to show up, but I think where parents get lost is that they feel like, I feel like I'm doing it all myself. I'm like, you are doing it all yourself. And so that's how you have to think of it. And you roll up and you're the one who's keeping all the trains running on time, and you're bringing the empathy. And it's a lot. It's a heavy burden. Ideally, you have access to therapy or some other form of support so you can just sort of share how unfair this feels. And it is unfair. I mean, and these relationships are unfair, and they create really unjust situations.
Exactly. What about those of us that are in the dating world and watching out? Or so one question is anyone able to successfully date a narcissist? And I would add on to that, like, how do we watch out for like making sure that we're not going to be dating a narcissist?
Well, I would
prevention
say that
and
yours is harder. I think the person's, is there any way to successfully date a narcissist? You can get out of there while you're still mid love bomb and it's still going well. You don't get all the way in deep, right? That would be the way to do it. I think that interestingly is actually, it's in early phases of dating where these relationships actually feel quite successful. They can be quite romantic. Narcissistic people know all the things to do. They send the text messages, most, not all, some, I should say some narcissistic people, they send the text messages, they might be attentive, they may feel like they're making the plans, they're doing the things, they might create very Instagrammable relationships, right? Some narcissistic people, though, they love the gamesmanship from the beginning. They like it that, they won't text you for a while. You're frustrated because you were having a good time. And then you're waiting and you're staring at your phone, and why aren't they? And you're reading all the dating books and And then they respond after 3 days and you're like, well, do I play it cool? Do I respond? So now you're already obsessing over this relationship. So they might do some of that game playing to see, in essence, what they're doing is they're testing your tolerances. How much can I neglect this person? How can I mess with this person? And the more messable you are, sadly, the more likely they're going to keep you around, because now they know they've got good supply. And so they'll test that out. Whereas if you say early on, like, now this doesn't work for me. Like, I'm a busy person. I like communication back and forth, and the text not coming for 2 days, that doesn't work. And so we have to make that promise to ourselves that we'll do that. We can't be messable with, if you will. Yeah.
I never thought of that as the behavior around the messability.
Holy. Yeah.
Like, I'm in the dating world, and that has happened a couple of times where the guy's just like gone, like, everything's great for the couple of days. We're texting back and forth, and everything seems like fantastic. And then all of a sudden, like a whole day or 40 hours go by, and like, what the heck?
Right. And then you make excuses, because then they come back in with the same charm offensive. So now you might only be 2 damn weeks into this relationship and you're already making excuses. Well, they gave me, like, they're really busy. They're a busy anesthesiologist. Then they need to go have their busy anesthesiologist life. Because if 4 days without communication doesn't work for you, you'll start rationalizing. So now by week 2, you're already setting the groundwork for the trauma bonded relationship.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Well, I just want to thank you so much, Dr. Ramani, for being with us today on the podcast and the IG, and all of you that joined us. It's always a pleasure learning from you. And I also wanted to mention that April 12th, 13th, 14th, Real Love Ready is hosting our summit in Vancouver, our yearly summit. And I would love for you to be one of our experts one year, Dr. Ramani, on the stage.
Absolutely.
Because we bring together the best of the best in the world to learn together. So we are going to be in touch. Well, and those of you that are here, please join us.
Thank you. And get the book, please.
Yes, get the book.
Like, it's out there.
To our summit.
People are telling me, like, it is helping them a little and helping them make sense. But I'd love to. I know sometimes when people talk about love, I'm the last person they want to ask. But I think in some ways, making ourselves resistant to narcissistic relationships is actually preparing us for any healthy relationship. So there's that.
Absolutely. It's about giving us skills and tools to navigate all relationships. And that's absolutely what you're so tremendous at. So thank you, everyone.
So much.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.